The Lost Letter. Chapter 1. The Miller of Arvel. In the imagined land of Astoria, nestled between quiet hills and winding rivers, stood the modest town of Arvel. It was a place untouched by haste, where time moved gently and the seasons were felt in the rhythm of daily life. Among its oldest residents lived a miller named Taren, a man of quiet habits and thoughtful eyes. His hair had turned silver long ago, and his hands bore the marks of decades spent working with grain and wood. He lived alone in a stone cottage beside the river, where the mill wheel turned steadily, powered by the flowing water of the Lyra. Taren's days followed a familiar pattern. He rose with the sun, tended to the mill, and spent his evenings reading by candlelight or walking along the riverbank. Though he had no family of his own, he felt no bitterness. His solitude was filled with memory, and his home was a sanctuary of the past. Inside, shelves sagged under the weight of old books, and boxes lined the walls, filled with letters, maps, and keepsakes left behind by his parents and grandparents. He rarely opened them, preferring to let the past rest undisturbed. Yet one rainy afternoon, as the wind rattled the shutters and the river swelled with autumn rain, Taren climbed to the attic in search of a blanket. The space was dusty and dim, filled with the scent of aged paper and cedar. As he moved aside a stack of old ledgers, his hand brushed against a small envelope, tucked beneath a wooden chest. The paper was yellowed and brittle, sealed with a faded wax emblem. Taren recognized it instantly, the crest of the Lever family, once neighbors and close friends of his kin. The Levers had lived across the river, their estate now long abandoned, and their names spoken only in fragments of old stories. The envelope bore no address, no date, only the seal. It had never been opened. Taren held it carefully, sensing its weight was more than paper. It was a relic, a whisper from a time before his own, and its presence stirred something deep within him. He descended the attic stairs slowly, the envelope pressed to his chest, unaware that this forgotten letter would soon unravel a story buried for generations. Chapter 2. The letter's contents. The envelope, fragile and yellowed with age, opened with a soft crackle as Taren carefully broke the seal. Inside lay a single sheet of paper, its ink faded but still legible, written in a graceful, flowing hand. The words revealed themselves slowly, as if reluctant to leave the safety of their silence. It was a love letter, penned by a woman named Elion, addressed to a man named Sar. Her tone was tender, yet urgent, filled with longing and quiet desperation. She spoke of secret meetings, of stolen glances across garden walls, and of a love that had grown in the shadows of family expectations. The letter was not merely a confession, it was a plea. Elion begged Sar to leave with her, to escape the rigid confines of their world and begin anew, far from the eyes that judged and the voices that forbade. The date at the top read Spring, 1872. Taren's heart stirred as he read, for that year was etched in his memory. It was the year the Levers and his own family had severed ties, abruptly and without explanation. He had heard whispers as a child, rumors of betrayal, of a scandal buried beneath layers of silence, but no one had ever spoken openly. The letter, untouched and unread for decades, now offered a glimpse into the truth. It was clear that Elion's words had never reached Sar. The envelope had remained hidden, lost among the clutter of time, and with it, the chance for reconciliation or escape. Taren sat quietly, the letter trembling in his hands. He imagined Elion, young and hopeful, pouring her heart onto the page, believing that love could overcome the barriers of tradition and pride. He imagined Sar, waiting, perhaps unaware of the message that might have changed his life. The letter was more than a forgotten note. It was a fragment of a story interrupted, a thread that had never been woven into the fabric of history. It held the weight of choices unmade, of paths never taken, and of emotions that had faded into silence. As he folded the paper and returned it to its envelope, Taren felt the stirrings of responsibility. This was not simply a relic. It was a key to understanding, a voice from the past asking to be heard. The quiet miller, surrounded by the hum of the river and the creak of the wheel, now held in his hands a secret that could illuminate the shadows of two families. And with that realization, the air around him seemed to shift, as if the past itself had begun to stir. Chapter 3. Shadows of the Past. Taren spent the following days immersed in the quiet corners of his home, searching through the layers of history that had long gathered dust. He opened old trunks, unwrapped bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon, and flipped through brittle pages of family ledgers and journals. His hands moved slowly, reverently, as if each item he touched might crumble under the weight of time. He was no longer simply a miller tending to grain and stone. He had become a seeker of memory, drawn into a story that had waited decades to be heard. Among the scattered records, he found a series of journals belonging to Aldrin, Care's father. The entries were written in a firm, deliberate hand, filled with observations about the estate, the weather, and the health of his family. But as Taren read deeper into the spring of 1872, the tone shifted. Aldrin wrote of Care's sudden illness, a fever that came without warning and lingered for weeks. He described his son's silence, his withdrawn gaze, and the way he wandered the halls at night, as if searching for something he could not name. There was no mention of Elion directly, but the absence of her name was itself a presence. Aldrin noted that someone had vanished from Care's life, someone whose absence had left a hollow that no medicine could fill. Taren continued reading, piecing together fragments of a story that had never been told aloud. He found a letter from Aldrin to a distant cousin, expressing concern over Care's condition and hinting at a broken engagement that had brought shame to the family. The words were vague, but the pain behind them was clear. Elion had disappeared, and Sar had never recovered. The letter Taren had found, unread, unsent, might have been the missing link, the message that could have changed everything. If Sar had received it, perhaps he would have left with her. Perhaps the families would not have fractured. Perhaps the silence would not have lasted so long. The weight of this realization settled heavily on Taren's shoulders. He sat by the window, the river murmuring outside, and stared at the letter once more. It was no longer just a piece of paper. It was a key to sorrow, a thread that connected generations through loss and misunderstanding. He wondered whether revealing it now would bring healing or reopen wounds best left untouched. The past was fragile, and its echoes could be unpredictable. Yet something within him resisted the idea of silence. He had lived his life quietly, respectfully, but this letter had found him for a reason. And though he hesitated, the question remained. Was it better to protect the peace of forgetting, or to risk the truth for the sake of memory? Chapter 4. Taren's Decision. Taren spent several days in quiet contemplation, the letter resting on his desk like a weight he could not ignore. The more he thought about Elion's words and Care's silence, the more he felt the urgency of action. The past had spoken, and now it was his turn to respond. Despite the uncertainty that lingered in his heart, he knew he could not keep the letter hidden. It was not his to bury again. It belonged to those whose lives had been shaped by its absence. He began asking discreet questions in town, tracing the lineage of the Lever family, hoping to find someone who might receive the truth with grace. Eventually, he learned of a young woman named Mira, a historian and archivist who had recently returned to Arvel to study her family's roots. She was the great-granddaughter of Elion, though she had never known her personally. Taren arranged to meet her at the local library, a quiet place filled with the scent of parchment and the rustle of turning pages. Mira was thoughtful, with eyes that held both curiosity and caution. She listened as Taren recounted what he had found: the letter, the journals, the fragments of a love story lost to time. He spoke slowly, choosing his words with care, aware that he was handing her a piece of her own history. Mira was visibly moved. She held the letter delicately, as if afraid it might vanish. Her hands trembled slightly as she read, and her expression shifted from surprise to sorrow to quiet reverence. She told Taren that in her family, there had always been whispers of a forbidden romance, a tale half remembered and never confirmed. Elion had been spoken of with affection, but also with mystery. No one had known the full truth. The letter, preserved through chance and rediscovery, was the missing piece. It proved that Elion's love had been real, her intentions sincere, and her silence not a choice but a consequence. Taren watched Mira with a sense of quiet fulfillment. He had feared that revealing the letter might cause pain, but instead, it had brought clarity. Mira promised to preserve the story, to honor the memory of Elion and Sar, and to share it with those who still wondered. For Taren, the act of passing on the letter was more than a gesture, it was a release. He had carried the weight of a forgotten truth, and now it had found its rightful place. As he left the library, the autumn wind brushed against his coat, and he felt lighter, as if the past had finally exhaled. Chapter 5. Reconciliation. In the weeks that followed, a quiet transformation unfolded in the town of Arvel. The letter, once buried in dust and silence, had begun to ripple through the lives of those connected to it. Mira, moved by the discovery and the truth it carried, devoted herself to compiling a family chronicle. She gathered stories, photographs, and fragments of memory from both the Lever and Sar families, weaving them into a tapestry that honored not only Elion and Sar, but the generations shaped by their absence. Her work became a bridge between two lineages that had long stood apart, separated by misunderstanding and time. Relatives who had not spoken in years began to reconnect. Old letters were shared, heirlooms exchanged, and names once forgotten were spoken again with warmth. The story of Elion and Sar, once a whisper, became a point of reflection and healing. Mira organized a gathering in the town square. A quiet evening of remembrance where candles were lit, music played softly, and passages from the letter were read aloud. People from both families came together, some with tears, others with smiles, all touched by the sense of closure and unity. It was not a celebration of loss, but of rediscovery. Taren stood at the edge of the gathering, his hands folded behind his back, watching the flickering lights and listening to the gentle hum of conversation. He did not seek attention, nor did he speak of his role. But within him bloomed a sense of peace. He had lived a life of solitude, shaped by routine and silence, yet in this quiet act of passing on a forgotten truth, he had become part of something larger. He had given voice to those who had been lost in the folds of history, and in doing so, had helped others find each other again. The miller, once surrounded only by the rhythm of the river and the turning wheel, now felt the pulse of connection. The past had not been rewritten, but it had been acknowledged. And in that acknowledgement, healing had begun. Taren returned to his cottage that night with a lighter step, the sound of laughter and memory echoing behind him. The letter had found its place, and so had he. Chapter 6. Light at the end of the path. Taren returned to his mill with a quiet sense of renewal. The wheel turned as it always had, the river flowed with its steady rhythm, and the scent of grain filled the air. Yet something within him had shifted. The days no longer felt like repetitions of the past but extensions of something deeper. He moved through his routines with calm purpose, no longer weighed down by solitude or the silence of old memories. The letter he had found, and the story it had unearthed, had given him more than answers. It had given him meaning. He began to notice the world around him with fresh eyes. The rustling of leaves in the morning breeze, the warmth of sunlight on the stone walls, the laughter of children passing by, all felt more vivid, more connected. He greeted neighbors with a softness in his voice, and they responded with warmth, sensing the change in him. Though he had always been kind, there was now a quiet openness in his presence, as if he had made peace with something long unresolved. The mill became more than a place of work. It was a space of reflection, of continuity, where the past and present met in harmony. Taren kept a small journal by the window, where he wrote not of grain or weather, but of thoughts stirred by memory. He did not dwell on the letter itself, but on what it had taught him. That history is not a burden to carry, but a root system that nourishes the present. The forgotten words of Elion had reached across time, and in doing so, had reminded him that even the quietest lives can hold great significance. He no longer feared the stillness of his cottage or the long hours alone. He understood now that solitude was not emptiness, but space for listening, to the wind, to the river, to the echoes of those who came before. He had become a keeper of stories, not through grand gestures, but through a single act of courage, choosing to share a truth that had waited in silence. The letter had been lost, but its rediscovery had brought healing, connection, and clarity. As the seasons turned and the leaves began to fall once more, Taren stood by the mill and watched the golden light stretch across the fields. He felt no need to chase miracles or uncover hidden treasures. He had learned that the greatest magic lies in the courage to speak, the grace to remember, and the wisdom to let go. And in that quiet understanding, he found peace. Moral: sometimes forgotten words can heal the heart. True kindness is not silence, but the courage to return truth to the light, even when it has long lived in shadow. One letter can reunite what once seemed lost forever. Thank you for your attention. If you like the story, please like and subscribe. It motivates us to make new videos and helps us promote the channel. Thank you.